So, you want to build Omarthis Ghostfire Initiate. Well, let me show you how a real Omarthis player builds him. Or her. Them? Yeah, builds them. Omarthis is double X for a 0/0 and enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever you put one or more +1/+1 counters on another colorless creature, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Omarthis. Finally, when Omarthis dies, manifest a number of cards from the top of your library equal to the number of counters on it. And if you don't know, manifesting is just putting the card face down on the field as a 2/2, and if it's a creature, you can flip it up whenever you want for its mana cost. It's kind of like forced morphing. So basically, the main idea here is to ramp up into a big number, play Omarthis, and then continue to enlarge in them until someone breaks them open like a piñata, and watch all the 2/2 candies fall out and beat the shit out of your opponents. So, to do that, let's first talk about the ramp in the deck, since having a lot of mana is very important to the commander. Being a colorless deck, most of the ramp is going to be mana rocks. So obviously we have Soul Ring, but we also run the 3 mana tap Soul Ring and Mere Soul Ring. In fact, having creatures is very important since you can flip them up after you manifest them. So creatures that ramp are actually preferred in this deck compared to other colorless decks. So Solemn Simulacrum and Burnished Heart are shoo-ins for this deck. We're also running the Mindstone Trifecta since, in my opinion, they have some of the best mana rocks for a colorless deck if you don't include the ones that are like $50+. So anyway, here's Grim Monolith in the deck. I might talk about gold bordered cards in the future, but I actually love them and they are cheap versions of expensive cards that are official Magic cards, and again, I love them. But anyway, continuing on with the ramp, we have Thought Vessel, which is another goated mana rock, and we also run Fractured Power Stone, not only since it's a 2 mana rock, but we run it just in case. Moonsilver Key, which can tutor for any basic land or one of these mana rocks. And finally, Basalt Monolith, because A, it gives you 3 mana for your commander for 3 mana, and B, it goes infinite with another colorless staple in the deck, Forsaken Monument, for easy infinite colorless mana, meaning you can get your Omarthis as big as you want, or with a sack engine, you can gain an infinite amount of life by casting your commander over and over again. Anyway, enough with mana. The next thing to help build up Omarthis is colorless creatures getting +1/+1 counters. First, we have the best card in the deck, Drillworks Mole. He not only puts a +1/+1 counter on your commander, but puts one on himself, meaning another counter will be put on Omarthis. And all of that for just a 1 mana tiny dude. We also run Spawning Construct and Iron Apprentice, being very similar cards that die and put a counter on something else. Patchwork Automaton gets a counter every time we cast an artifact spell. Steel Overseer taps to put a counter on each artifact creature we control. Chronobaton lets you pay 1 to tap it to put a counter on itself. And Clockwork Hydra enters the battlefield with counters and can tap to put a counter on itself. I also run Hypocrisite, which is kind of bad and really slow, but he's just a little guy, and I cannot bring myself to cut him. We also have other Expo creatures other than Omarthis, but they aren't as good as you think in this deck because they are completely useless when you manifest them. Meaning I only really run the best ones, being Hanerback Walker since it gives you Thauber's when it dies, along with being able to put a counter on it every turn. Cryptic Trilobite, which is a very similar card, but it's used for mana instead of getting tokens. And then Stonecorer Serpent is just a really good card. Finally, Sword Devours is a great way to get counters early. Blade of the Bloodchief can passively get you counters throughout the game. Animation Module is a way to get easy tokens. I can even add a counter if you have nothing else to do. And the Ozolith is to save counters and is a staple included in any deck focusing on counters. And hey, speaking of staples in the deck, what would a deck be without removal? Well, in colorless, we don't have many options, but we run what we can. All Is Dust is by far the best removal spell in any colorless deck ever. Desecrate Reality is weird, but it's still pretty decent. And Warping Whale is a counter spell, but it can also technically kill a Brush Rag. So, it counts. Then we got more desperate removal options. Canoptek Tomb Sentinel is a creature that removes something when you unearth it, which if it gets manifested, it will die and set you up for it. You can see where we're at right now. Steel Hellkite is a big flyer that can also blow things up, although in reality, being 100% honest, I have never used this once. And finally, Invasion of Ravnica, because even though the backside is just a 5/5 that does nothing in this deck, we are just that desperate. Next, we have 3 cards with the explicit purpose of copying Omarthis' death trigger. Strayank Resonator, Lithiform Engine, and Abstruse Archaic. Cause what's better than 10 2/2s, 20 2/2s, 30 2/2s, 40 2/2s? Where's my deck? And with that, I've run out of categories. So the rest of the deck is just CCC. Cool colorless cards. And what's cooler than locking out your opponents with Mycosynth Lattice and calling the Great Creator? You know? This is why I don't have friends. Speaking of Karn, we also got Karn Scion of Urza, mainly for card draw, and Karn the Liberal because he's fucking insane. Staying on the Planeswalker train, we also have Ugin the Ineffable, since it makes everything cost 2 less along with being removal and creature making / card draw. We also have Ugin the Spear Dragon because, again, he's fucking insane. Skittering Cicada and Urza's Battlethopter are both here to give all your spells flash, along with the Battlethopter getting counters. Triplicate Titan being a huge boy that dies and makes smaller boys, leading into the big Eldrazi boys. Artisan Kozilek to free reanimate another big boy and just being huge himself, Pathrazer of Ulamog, Conduit of Ruin as more cost reduction and being a tutor, Inbringer for versatility, Reality Smasher, and Thought-Knot Seer, who I really like in Commander because you don't have to give the player you stole a card from the card draw from his death trigger, which is an extra little fuck you that makes me love him. And speaking of card draw, we got Zenith Chronicler, which is never going to let you down because you are never going to cast a multicolored spell in your life. Filgry Familiar, who is basically a baby version of Solemn Simulacrum, and is the cutest damn card I've ever seen in my life, and I want no harm done to him, or else every single resource I have will be used to make sure you don't play the game for the rest of the day. Then we got Sensei's Divine Top and the One Ring, which, honestly, they both kind of suck. Probably quarter cards. I only really put them in here just because I have them laying around. Might take them out, honestly. Mystic Forge, which lets you play artifacts and color spells from the top of your library. And oh, would you look at that, that's the entire deck. Ugin's Mastery is genuinely not that good, but I think it's a neat card, and it's flavorful, so I'm keeping it in. And everything I just said for Ugin's Mastery can be copied and pasted for Scroll of Fate, so just rewind it back to that part, and imagine I'm talking about Scroll of Fate. Unlicensed Hearse is for Graveyard Hate, the Stasis Coffin is to save yourself from a pickle, and is very underrated in my opinion. Eldrazi Monument is not only a way to give you huge commander safety and evasion, but gives you a way to sacrifice it and buffs every single one of those manifested tokens, and since you'll be manifesting like 10 plus cards with Omarthis, you'll never really run out of creatures to sacrifice to it. And finally, we have Ashnod's Altar, which you can do this really cool thing where you sack Omarthis for 2 mana, then you sack all the tokens he makes for mana, and use all that mana to recast Omarthis. So if he has like 8 counters on him, you sack him, manifest 8, sack those 8 for a total mana pool of 18 colorless, then recast Omarthis for 8, 16 mana plus 2 for command attacks, then do it again and recast him for 7, and repeat until your entire deck is empty, and then you play Thassa's Oracle, and then you have no deck and a full graveyard, and that's kind of it. It's just neat. Okay, so while editing this video, I realized you can just run Grimoire of the Dead, and if you finish it and then do that whole Omarthis thing, you can resurrect your entire graveyard, obviously leaving some cards in your deck so you don't just lose the next turn. But even though this whole strategy is a shithead idea, I think it's really funny, so take out like Grim Monolith or something for it, and I'm sure it'll be worth it. Please do that and send me a video of it happening. And that's the end of that. But we are far from over. Because you see, the one thing colorless does better than any of the actual colors is utility lands. That's right, we still got 30 more unique cards to talk about, fucker, so strap in. First off, we have to run the Urza lands, including Tower, Mine, and Power Plant. And since we are, I'm also throwing in Urza's Workshop, because Metalcraft isn't going to be a real problem, and the more mana for Omarthis, the better. Speaking of more mana, God, I'm good at transitions. Temple of the False God, Shrine of the Forsaken God, and Ancient Tomb all tap for 2 mana under their respective condition or downside, or in Shrine's case, both. Then we have the land destruction trio of Ghost Quarter, Demolition Field, and Field of Ruin, these being half the reason I run any basic lands at all. Then we have the man lands with Mishra's Factory, Mishra's Foundry, Crawling Barrens, and Mutavault. The latter two being especially notable since Crawling Barrens puts counters on itself, but with how it's worded, it doesn't give Omarthis counters on the first activation each turn, because it being a creature happens after the counters were already placed on it, and whoever made the card this way should learn a little more about land in general by spending a good few decades being 6 feet under some, and Mutavault is notable because it can tap itself to make itself a creature. You ever self-animate a Mutavault to make someone perfectly draw out with a Decree of Pain? Huh? You ever do that? Well, I want to. Zoret Cavern has Morph, which means you can morph it face up if it gets manifested, and I just find it funny. War Room and Arch of Vraska are both efficient ways to draw cards. I mean, well, one of them's efficient. Scavenger Grounds is another anti-graveyard card. Arcane Lighthouse removes Hexproof and Shroud, so we can use our premium removal on Slippery Boggle without any worries at all. God's Eye, Gate to the
Rikai.
Despite having a super long name and having gate in the name, it's not only not a gate, but it's just a waste that gives you a 1/1 when it gets destroyed. Darksteel Citadel has a regular sized name and doesn't have gate in the name, and it's not a gate because it doesn't pretend to be, and it's just a waste that can't be destroyed. Dranyard Temple can come back from the graveyard in case it gets manifested and dies. Reliquary Tower gives you no maximum hand size. Zalfrin Void scries 1 when it enters. Karn's Bastion can proliferate, which gives Omarthis a lot of counters. Dranath Ruins gives counters to a non-human that entered this turn. High Market is just a free and easy way to sacrifice Omarthis to get those sweet 2/2s. Rogue's Passage is in case you change your mind and rather just beat the shit out of someone with commander damage. Arena is a roundabout way to kill creatures using your big Omarthis, and it's pretty much shadow banned from Magic as a whole, since you now have to scroll down half a page of Google Images to find it when you look up MTG Arena. And Thespian Stage can turn itself into any of the lands mentioned, including the shadow banned one. And finally, we have 5 basic wastes to round off the deck. Honestly, half this deck is just cool colorless cards, CCC, with the other half being actually synergistic cards, but that's the beauty of colorless decks. You just kind of throw in any cool colorless cards, CCC, into the deck that you want, and as long as you can cast them, it's gonna be fun and kinda cool. Hell, if I had Rise of the Eldrazi, I'd throw it in the deck because it's just a really cool and good colorless card. At the end of the day, colorless is just kind of a novelty, and you can have fun with any colorless commander because they're not that different from each other. Almost every single colorless deck is either artifacts or big Eldrazi or both. Anyway, I still don't know how to end videos or how to make them apparently, so like, subscribe, I don't know, goodbye.